Hey everyone, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight we're going to dim the lights. Perhaps wrap yourself in a comfortable blanket and prepare to drift into a rather unsettling corner of human history. As you settle deeper into the quiet of this evening, perhaps consider a gentle tap on the subscribe button and a soft like on the video. Only, of course, if these historical whispers find a welcome place in your thoughts and offer a calm companion to your night. And feel free to share a quiet hello in the comments below, letting us know where you're drifting from tonight. Now imagine for a moment a time not so terribly long ago, a time shrouded in the mists of what we now call the Dark Ages. It's a period often dismissed as insignificant, a mere lull between grander eras, but buried deep within its heart lies a single 12-month span so profoundly catastrophic that it fundamentally reshaped the world. We're going to step into that year. We're going to explore 536 AD, often referred to with good reason as the worst year in history. It was a year that would challenge your very will to survive a year when the familiar comforts of the world you knew simply vanished. And our journey tonight begins not with a grand historical overview, but with the intensely personal, the chilling realities of simply trying to exist under a sky that had decided to betray its inhabitants. Imagine yourself waking in the spring of 536 AD, or perhaps the spring of 537 AD, depending on where you were on this spinning globe. Your eyes open, but something is immediately subtly wrong. The light filtering through the small, perhaps unglazed window of your dwelling isn't the crisp, promising light of dawn you've always known. Instead, it's dim, diffused, as if a perpetual twilight has descended, rendering the world in muted tones of gray and umber. The sun, that life-giving orb, is no longer a bright disk in the sky. It hangs there, if you can even discern its outline through the haze, as a pale coppery shadow, or perhaps a faint bruised purple. It seems to have lost its vitality, its very will to burn. For 18 long months, this would be your daily reality. You might strain your eyes trying to convince yourself it was merely an overcast day, but the relentless, unchanging dimness would soon disabuse you of that comforting thought. This wasn't weather. This was a fundamental shift in the very fabric of your world. And it wasn't just the light that had gone awry. You might step outside, perhaps, to tend to your meager crops, or to gather water from the village well, and notice a fine, almost imperceptible dust clinging to everything. It wasn't the dust of a dry field, or the grit from a well-trod road. This was something alien, a yellowish-brown powder that rained down ceaselessly like an insidious silent snow. You could scoop it up in handfuls, marveling at its strange color, wondering at its origin. It settled on your hair, dusted your clothes, coated the leaves of trees, and clung to the rough wooden walls of your home. It mingled with the damp air, creating a perpetual haze that blurred the horizon and dulled the vibrant greens of summer. It was a constant, unnerving presence, a physical manifestation of the world's sickness. The air itself held a chill, a persistent cold that refused to yield to the calendar. You'd anticipate the mild warmth of spring, the gentle embrace of summer, but they simply wouldn't arrive. Instead, north winds would bite, bringing with them a bone-deep cold that spoke of lingering winter even as the days grew longer. The very concept of a spring without mildness and a summer without heat would become your lived experience. You'd bundle yourself in layers of coarse wool and animal skins, huddle closer to the fire, but the cold would seep into your bones, a constant, uncomfortable companion. And with this chill came the gnawing fear of new frosts. a dread that would grip you as you watched the tender shoots in your fields, knowing that one unexpected cold snap could wipe out your entire season's labor. Your livelihood, your very survival was tethered to the rhythm of the land. But now the earth had become stubbornly unproductive. Trees, those silent sentinels of time, hardly put on any new growth for years, their rings shrinking to near invisibility, a stark botanical testament to the world's suffering. And without the sun's full strength, without the necessary warmth and rainfall, your crops would fail. The grains that formed the backbone of your diet, wheat, barley, oats, would simply not mature, or would yield a pitiful, stunted harvest. The fruits that sweetened your meager meals would not ripen. The trees would bear little or nothing. This was not merely a bad harvest. This was an agricultural collapse, a systemic failure of the land to provide. You, your family, your entire community would be forced to abandon the familiar stable rhythm of farming and resort to desperate measures. Perhaps you'd turn to the forests for foraging or to the rivers and coasts for fishing. But these were precarious, uncertain means of sustenance, putting immense strain on populations accustomed to the predictable bounty of their fields. The constant, profound hunger would become a dull ache in your belly, a weariness in your limbs. As the great king of Japan lamented, reflecting on this very period, "Food is the basis of the empire. One cannot cure hunger. What avails 1,000 boxes of pearls to him who is starving of cold?" Indeed, for the vast majority things would have been fairly bleak. As if the perpetual twilight and gnawing hunger weren't enough, as if the cold that gripped the land refused to release its icy embrace. Another horror began to unfurl its dark wings, bringing with it a different kind of darkness. Perhaps a few years after the initial climatic shock around 542 AD, you might begin to hear whispers, then frantic cries from the bustling port cities, the very arteries of trade and connection that once sustained your world. A new, terrifying illness had arrived, a silent, swift predator moving with chilling efficiency. This was not a familiar fever or a seasonal ailment. This was something utterly unprecedented, a scourge so profound that chronicles would later refer to it as the Great Mortality or the First Plague. Imagine the initial symptoms, perhaps in a distant cousin or a neighbor, or God forbid in your own household. It would begin subtly in the head, perhaps a dull ache intensifying to a blinding pressure. Then the eyes might grow bloodshot swollen, and the face itself would begin to distend, distorting familiar features into something monstrous. From the head, the agony would descend, tightening its grip around the throat, making every breath a shallow struggle, every swallow an impossibility. For some, the internal turmoil manifested differently, a relentless flowing of the bowels, an unending internal drain. And then the most horrifying sign, the visible mark of this unseen enemy. Terrible pustules, painful, angry swellings would erupt under the armpits in the groin, testament to a body in revolt. The description relayed by a contemporary monk named Evagrius paints a grim picture. These were not mere boils, but rather the visible manifestation of a system shutting down piece by agonizing piece. The speed of its progression was perhaps its most chilling attribute. You might witness a person seemingly robust and full of life one moment succumb to its clutches and be gone within 2 or 3 days. It was a brutal efficiency, offering little time for farewells, for remedies, or even for comprehension. Sometimes mercifully the mind would drift, consciousness fading before the end. But for others, the terror was compounded by an agonizing clarity. Their minds would remain intact, fully aware of their body's betrayal as the disease systematically devoured them from within. To witness such agony, to be powerless against its relentless march, would be to live in a constant state of dread, never knowing whose turn would be next, or if the next cough, the next feverish flush would be your own. And what of the cities, those once vibrant centers of human endeavor and connection? Take Constantinople, the glittering jewel of the late Roman Empire, a metropolis that had previously thrived on trade and culture. By 542 AD, it had transformed into a charnel house. The sheer volume of death defied all conventional means of disposal. You might see special boats burdened to the point of capsizing, ferrying corpses out to sea, their wakes disturbed by the silent, grim cargo. City wall towers designed for defense were repurposed into macabre repositories crammed full of bodies until they overflowed. Cisterns meant for life-giving water became mass graves. Even private orchards, once symbols of domestic tranquility, were dug up their fertile earth, disturbed to accommodate the ceaseless demands of the dead. The very air of Europe's biggest city, a place where scents of exotic spices and fresh bread once mingled, now stank for month after month after month. It was a pervasive, inescapable stench of decay and despair, a constant nauseating reminder of the horror that had gripped every street, every home. Counting, a basic human attempt to quantify tragedy, simply ceased. One contemporary recorded that when the dead reached 250,000, the tallying stopped, as if the numbers themselves had become meaningless in the face of such overwhelming devastation. Soldiers whose purpose was to defend found themselves compelled to the gruesome labor of digging mass graves, their weapons replaced by shovels, their martial training by the grim necessity of burying the endless tide of the fallen. It was quite simply chaos and pandemonium, a complete inversion of social order and human dignity. The terrifying reality was that this was a plague. They knew nothing about a new, unimaginable horror that instilled a fear so profound it reshaped the very fabric of human existence. As the Roman Empire reeled under the twin blows of climatic catastrophe and the terrifying plague, other corners of the world, seemingly distant and disconnected, were experiencing their own profound disruptions, often in ways that would strike you as utterly alien. Travel eastward, far across the vast steppes of Mongolia, and you might encounter the Avars. Before 535 AD, these were the undisputed overlords of their expansive region, fierce and formidable barbarian horsemen who commanded respect and instilled fear. Their very existence, their culture, and their formidable military might were inextricably woven into the lives of their horses. Imagine a society where every aspect of your daily sustenance, your transportation, your warfare, even your social status revolved around these magnificent animals. Your diet, for instance, would heavily feature fermented mare's milk, a source of both food and a potent alcoholic beverage, perhaps offering a fleeting escape from the harsh realities of steppe life. This horse-centric existence was their strength, making them arguably the most advanced horsemen on the planet, possibly even the inventors of the stirrup, a technological innovation that gave them an unprecedented military edge. Now pause for a moment and consider the cultural chasm that separated these nomadic peoples from the settled civilizations to their west and east. From the perspective of the highly organized and fastidiously proper Chinese chroniclers, the Avars were nothing short of foul-smelling barbarians. They reportedly never bathed and never washed their clothing, habits that would strike you, a modern listener accustomed to daily showers and washing machines, as quite peculiar. But the detail that perhaps most vividly captures this cultural shock and offers a quiet, almost unsettling glimpse into their daily practices was their method of cleaning dishes. Imagine, if you will, the women of the tribe after a meal simply licking the plates clean. To the Chinese, this was not merely unhygienic. It was outrageous, a testament to the extreme differences in daily practices and hygienic norms between their sophisticated urban centers and the rugged, pragmatic world of the steppe nomads. It's a small, curious detail, but it paints a picture of a way of life utterly unconcerned with the niceties of settled society, entirely adapted to survival in a harsh, unforgiving landscape. But even this highly specialized, horse-dependent way of life was not immune to the global climatic shifts. Chinese records and the silent testimony of Siberian tree rings tell a stark story. The Mongolian steppe, the very heartland of Avar power, was severely affected by the cold and dry conditions that followed the 535 AD eruption. And these weren't fleeting conditions. Their effects lingered, stretching for decades, slowly strangling the very ecosystem upon which the Avars relied. This brings us to a crucial yet often overlooked vulnerability in their robust economy. While horses were essential, their digestive systems are surprisingly less efficient than those of, say, cattle. A horse's dung is notoriously fibrous, indicating that they extract less nutritional value from their food. Cattle, by contrast, can digest a much wider range of herbage, including very rank vegetation, thriving where horses would struggle. In a prolonged drought, with pastures turning to dust and the quality of vegetation plummeting, horses simply could not find sufficient food. Their digestion suffered, their health declined, and their numbers dwindled. This seemingly minor biological detail, when writ large across an entire civilization, meant that the Avars, the mighty horse lords, became very vulnerable under the post-catastrophe conditions. Their strength had become their fatal flaw. The consequences were swift and brutal. Around 552 AD, the Avars, previously dominant, were suddenly and mysteriously crushed by the Turks, a people from the surrounding highlands whom they had long subjugated. Thousands of Avars were slaughtered, countless more enslaved, and their leader, in despair, committed suicide. This was no mere military defeat. It was a societal implosion, a direct result of their economic foundations being undermined by the climate. The surviving Avars, now refugees, were forced into an epic 4,000-mile westward journey. Imagine the scale of such a displacement. A vast, desperate caravan traversing northern Kazakhstan, skirting the Caspian Sea, pushing onward into the fertile grasslands south of the Carpathian Mountains in the Balkans. Yet incredibly, as they traveled, their superior horse technology, their mastery of cavalry warfare remained unmatched by anything they encountered. They recovered, adapted, and once again became a conquering people, reaching the fringes of the Roman Empire by the late 550s. Their arrival, a direct ripple effect of the 535 AD catastrophe, would cast a long, dark shadow over the already weakened Romans, constantly harassing them and extracting vast amounts of gold, an estimated 7 billion palers in today's terms over 50 years, in a chilling form of climatic-induced blackmail. The fall of the Avars, then their improbable resurgence, serves as a testament to both the fragility of specialized societies and the extraordinary human capacity for adaptation, even under the most dire circumstances. While the ancient world grappled with plague and the migration of fierce horsemen, the climatic catastrophe of 535 AD cast its long, parching shadow across vast oceans, reaching even to the heart of Mesoamerica. Here, nestled on the central Mexican plain, stood Teotihuacan, a city of astonishing scale and sophistication. In the early 6th century, this was no ordinary settlement. With a staggering 125,000 residents, Teotihuacan was truly a primate city, a sprawling urban marvel that dwarfed any other in the region by an almost incomprehensible margin. The next largest settlements boasted perhaps a mere tenth of its population. Imagine living in such a place. Grand pyramids piercing the sky, wide avenues bustling with merchants and pilgrims, vibrant murals adorning public buildings, and an intricate social structure that governed the lives of hundreds of thousands. It was a beacon of power, culture, and innovation, a testament to human ingenuity and organized society. Yet shortly after the distant bang of a volcano and the subsequent dimming of the sun, problems began to fester within this magnificent metropolis. These weren't immediate dramatic collapses, but rather a slow, insidious decline that would have subtly then overtly permeated every aspect of daily life. The first most heartbreaking signs would have been visible in the youngest and most vulnerable members of society. Rebecca Story, an archaeologist who meticulously analyzed skeletons from Cahinga, a sprawling suburb of Teotihuacan, brought to light a grim reality. Her painstaking work revealed a severe deterioration in the health of the population during the city's later period, with children, particularly babies, suffering disproportionately. You might imagine the constant presence of illness in your own family, persistent coughs, fevers that lingered, and a general frailty that seemed to cling to the young. The skeletal evidence tells a silent story of long-lasting bacterial infections on children's bones, a direct consequence of profound malnutrition and the compromised health of their mothers. This wasn't merely a bad cold. This was chronic, debilitating sickness that shaped the earliest years of a child's life, often leading to its premature end. The mortality statistics, when viewed through the lens of modern epidemiology, paint an even more alarming picture. In Teotihuacan's twilight years, an overwhelming 70% of the sampled population who died were babies, children, and individuals under the age of 25. Compare this to the earlier periods when that figure hovered around 40 to 45%. This wasn't just a slight downturn. It was a demographic catastrophe, a population quite literally collapsing from within, unable to sustain itself. For you living in Teotihuacan during this time, it would mean the constant presence of grief, the quiet despair of seeing so many of the young, the very future of your community, simply fade away. It's hard to imagine the psychological toll of such pervasive loss, a city slowly bleeding its lifeblood. What brought this once thriving city to its knees? Recent scientific dating has pushed back the timeline of Teotihuacan's decline by 150 years, placing its mid to late 6th century downfall in direct alignment with the global climatic disaster. While direct tree ring evidence from Mexico is scarce, a chorus of corroborating data from across the Americas paints a clear picture. Lake deposits in the Yucatan Peninsula show a severe 30-year drought kicking off in the mid-6th century. Californian and Chilean tree rings tell a similar story, indicating dramatic reductions in growth from the late 530s onwards. Even distant Colombia's river levels recorded the mid to late 6th century as the driest period in 3,000 years. The conclusion becomes starkly clear. Teotihuacan was gripped by a long-lasting, devastating drought, which relentlessly choked its food supply and pushed its population to the brink. The interconnected problems cascaded with grim inevitability. A dwindling food supply made people desperately susceptible to illness, their weakened bodies easy prey for disease. And in a very dry environment, where water was already a precious commodity, the severe scarcity led to great sanitation problems. Think of it: fewer opportunities to wash, to clean, to manage waste, all leading to lots of diseases circulating, exacerbating the already dire mortality rates. Sickness, in turn, directly affected the city's productivity. A city full of unwell, undernourished people is not an efficient one. Trade would slow, construction would falter, and the very dynamism that made Teotihuacan a primate city would erode. It simply ceased to be a good place to be, its allure and promise replaced by hardship and despair. The final act of Teotihuacan's demise was a violent and profound rejection of its leadership. The city was not slowly abandoned, but rather destroyed when its people rose up against their elite rulers. Imagine the simmering resentment, the growing desperation as crops withered and children died. The priestly class in Teotihuacan was understood to be responsible for mediating with the gods, for bringing the rain and making the springs flow. When the rains did not come, when the vital springs diminished to trickles, confidence in these supposed intermediaries would have vanished like morning mist under a merciless sun. The smashing of palaces and the setting ablaze of the city's biggest temple were not random acts of vandalism. They were deliberate symbolic acts of societal rejection, a desperate plea for change in the face of perceived elite failure. This violent revolution, born of environmental catastrophe and a profound loss of faith in leadership, mirrored the destabilization and collapse seen in the Roman Empire, demonstrating the pervasive global impact of 535 AD on human civilization. Leaving the dust-choked ruins of Teotihuacan, let us now cross another ocean, venturing into the rain-swept, often misty lands of early medieval Britain. Here in the mid-6th century, the landscape was a patchwork of nascent kingdoms and simmering conflicts. The mighty Romans had departed a century prior, leaving a power vacuum and a legacy of fragmented rule. The native British tribes, often referred to as Celts, clung to the western fringes, while Anglo-Saxon invaders from northern Europe steadily pushed eastward, their longships having brought them to these shores in search of new lands. This was a turbulent time, a period of transition and brutal territorial struggle, a crucible in which the very foundations of what would one day become England were being forged. It's also a time steeped in legend, inextricably linked to the mythical figure of King Arthur, whose alleged death, variously dated to 539 or 542 AD, coincides uncannily with the global climatic catastrophe. The Arthurian legends, often dismissed as mere fantasy, may in fact harbor a distant, chilling memory of the cataclysmic events of 535 AD. Picture the imagery. Ancient texts describe Arthur's country turned into a wasteland, a desolate, parched landscape where he rode through choking dust. Trees once verdant were described as down, their mighty trunks felled not by axe, but by some unseen force. The grain, the very staff of life, was destroyed, and all things laid waste as if lightning had struck. This isn't just poetic license. It resonates deeply with the environmental devastation wrought by the volcanic dust veil. Imagine the psychological impact of living in such a land where the very earth seemed to have turned against you. The human toll was equally stark. Half the people in the villages dead. The legend recounts a stark testament to a profound population collapse. The environment itself mirrored this desolation. The earth no longer produced when cultivated, meaning no wheat or other grain grew there. No tree bore fruit, and even very few fish were found in the sea. Survival would have been a daily grueling struggle, a relentless quest for sustenance in a landscape that had become utterly unyielding. The sheer scale of this desolation led to a grim, evocative name for the afflicted regions. They were simply called the Wasteland. Keyes theorizes that these ancient legends passed down through generations could be a veiled remembrance of the climatic catastrophe's brutal impact on the native British populace a cultural scar etched by an existential crisis. And then, as if the environmental hardship were not enough, another insidious horror arrived riding the very trade winds that had once brought prosperity. Around 547 AD, the bubonic plague, the very same great mortality that had ravaged the Roman Empire, finally reached the shores of Britain. Historical certainty underscores its arrival. British and Irish annals confirm its devastating presence. It primarily entered through the bustling ports on the Cornish coast points of vibrant exchange, where the British still traded with the Roman world, unwittingly opening a gateway for the unseen enemy. The impact was immediate and profound. This was a significant event, universally referred to as Mortalitas Magna, the Great Mortality, and chillingly, Mortalitas Prima, the first plague indicating its unprecedented horror and the utter lack of prior experience with such a virulent epidemic. The physical symptoms as experienced in Britain were just as agonizing as in Constantinople. People developed terrible pustules underneath their armpits and their groins, the telltale buboes that marked the victims. They would have died, as contemporary accounts grimly attest, in the most terrible agony. The horror of it was completely new. People knew nothing about it, utterly unprepared for its swift, brutal efficiency. Imagine the pervasive terror, the desperate attempts to understand and combat a disease that defied all traditional remedies, a sickness that seemed to strike indiscriminately, leaving a trail of death and despair. This dual catastrophe, climatic devastation followed by plague, had profound unforeseen consequences for the political reshaping of Britain. The island was already sharply divided. The native Celtic Britons, culturally and economically linked to the Roman world, occupied the west, while the Anglo-Saxon invaders, whose trade networks were oriented towards Germany and Scandinavia, held sway in the east. This distinct societal divide proved critical. The Celtic Britons, with their extensive trade links to the Roman Empire, were far more exposed to the plague's advance. The Anglo-Saxons, on the other hand, were comparatively isolated from the immediate contagion. The tragic outcome was a huge population reduction in the Celtic West and Center, a devastating demographic collapse that created a gaping population vacuum. With the native population decimated, the Anglo-Saxon peoples were able to move westward into these partially empty lands with far less resistance. Keyes posits a compelling theory. England. The very nation came about because the Anglo-Saxons were able to defeat the plague-stricken Britons, not necessarily through superior military might, but by expanding into lands emptied by disease. A 6th century poem, hauntingly illustrative, tells of the defeat of the men of Godothan Celts, with only 1 from 100 returning alive. It's a stark, almost unbelievably grim portrait of a society utterly undone. The 535 AD catastrophe, then, was a watershed moment, a critical juncture where forces were unleashed that would, over the next century and a half, profoundly shape the modern nations of Europe, laying the very foundations for the world we recognize today. From the rain-soaked, plague-ravaged shores of Britain, our journey continues, guiding us now to the sun-baked, arid landscapes of the Arabian Peninsula, specifically to its southern tip, the region of Yemen. Here, at the dawn of the 6th century, before the great climatic disruption, Yemen was a power of immense significance, perhaps the greatest in the entire region. Its prosperity, its very existence, was utterly dependent on a singular monumental feat of engineering, the Marib Dam. Imagine a structure so vast, so critical to the lifeblood of a civilization, that its fate was intertwined with the destiny of millions. The Marib Dam was indeed huge, stretching an astonishing 2,000 feet in length, a colossal barrier that held back floodwaters and channeled them into hundreds of miles of intricate canals. These canals, in turn, fed a verdant oasis, transforming a barren landscape into fertile agricultural land, supporting a thriving population and a sophisticated society. This dam was not merely an infrastructure project. It was the beating heart of an entire culture, a testament to their ingenuity and their mastery over a challenging environment. However, within a few short years of the 535 AD catastrophe, the delicate balance that sustained Yemen was shattered. The same climatic chaos that brought famine to Europe and drought to Mesoamerica descended upon Arabia with equal ferocity. The initial blow was relentless drought, parching the land, drying up the reservoirs, and starving the fields. But the paradox of climate change is often that extremes beget other extremes. The prolonged drought was then followed by a succession of violent storms and flash floods, a cruel irony of nature. These deluges, rather than replenishing the land, gently attacked the very foundation of Yemen's prosperity. The Marib Dam, once a symbol of unyielding strength, began to weaken under the strain. Imagine the desperate efforts to maintain it, the constant attempts at repair meticulously recorded on contemporary inscriptions. One such great inscription from 542 AD commemorates the valiant rebuilding efforts by the ruler Abraha, a testament to the sheer will to survive and restore. But such inscriptions, after a few hundred years, simply cease. The dam, weakened beyond repair by the relentless assault of extreme weather, was abandoned. Its intricate network of canals, once channels of life, lay to waste, gradually consumed by the encroaching desert sands. The consequence was nothing short of ruin for Yemen. Its sophisticated agricultural system, its very ability to sustain its large population, withered and died. The inevitable outcome was a mass migration. Driven by the stark choice between starvation and survival, its people were forced to abandon their ancestral lands, undertaking arduous journeys to seek new regional power bases that were beginning to emerge, particularly around the nascent settlements of Medina and Mecca. This mass displacement, this forced relocation of an entire society, set the stage for one of history's most transformative developments. For it was in 570 AD, in the heart of this tumultuous, climatically altered landscape, that the Prophet Muhammad was born in Mecca. His life and the subsequent rise of Islam would unfold in a region profoundly reshaped by the events of 535 AD. The growth of Medina as a political center crucial to the early evolution of Islam was directly linked to these migrations. As communities sought new hubs for survival and trade, these cities gained prominence. Even Muhammad's own family, the Banu Hashim clan, found themselves elevated amidst the chaos. In a period of widespread drought and famine when securing food was paramount, Muhammad's ancestors took on the critical role of importing and providing food for the population. This ability to secure and distribute essential resources during a time of extreme scarcity became a significant claim to fame and to status within the shifting social hierarchy of the Arabian Peninsula. Their ability to secure and distribute essential resources to literally feed the people in a time of widespread scarcity granted them immense influence and trust. Muhammad's revolutionary message resonated with immense power in this context. The ancient world was gripped by a profound period of upheaval and disturbance. You could feel an apocalyptic atmosphere hanging heavy in the air. The mighty Roman Empire, which had dominated for 800 years, seemed to be tottering, weakened by plague and barbarian incursions. War, revolution, and societal collapse were not abstract concepts. They were daily realities. Political certainties of the world were collapsing around everybody's ears. No one seemed sure of the future. It was a very, very unsettled time to live, a world searching for answers, for new meaning, for stability. Keyes argues compellingly that all these factors, the environmental collapse, the mass migrations, the shifting power dynamics, the rise of new forms of leadership based on crisis management, and the pervasive sense of societal uncertainty all feed into the early evolution of Islam. The 535 AD eruption, then, was not just an environmental event. It was a profound indirect catalyst for the birth of a new world religion, reshaping the spiritual and political landscape of the Middle East, and ultimately the world. The enduring lesson from the 535 AD event is profound and sobering. It demonstrates how a single global catastrophe can utterly disturb the status quo, dismantling established orders and creating the fertile ground for history to reform itself all over the world. It acts as a powerful interface between the ancient world and the world we live in today, a pivotal moment that irrevocably changed the trajectory of human civilization. Crucially, this transformation isn't immediate. It's not a big bang followed by instant change, but rather a slow, complex unwinding. It takes 100 to 150 years for the new reality to actually emerge, for the dust to settle, for new societies to coalesce, for new religions to take root, and for new nations to be born from the ashes of the old. This long tale of catastrophe, this extended period of adaptation and recreation, is a testament to both the fragility and the resilience of human civilization. Having immersed ourselves in the harrowing personal experiences and immediate societal consequences across the globe, it's now time to embark on the investigative journey itself. How do we, from the comfort of our modern world, piece together the fragments of a catastrophe that occurred nearly 1,500 years ago, a catastrophe so profound it was largely lost to the very dark ages it helped to define? This is where our story truly begins to unravel the mystery, much like a detective meticulously gathering clues from seemingly disparate sources. The central puzzle, as David Keyes, our chief investigator in this historical detective story, would discover, was not merely what happened, but how an event buried so deeply in the historical record could have affected millions worldwide and laid the foundations for the modern world we inhabit. Imagine David Keyes, not an academic historian confined to university halls, but a journalist driven by an insatiable curiosity operating from the quiet confines of his suburban home. His quest, an astonishing 5-year immersion into a worldwide historical investigation, began with a fascination for the enigmatic entries in ancient chronicles. He encountered mentions of skies gone dark rain, the color of blood, and clouds of fine dust enveloping the earth. These were not isolated incidents, but rather globally echoed reports, a chilling consistency across continents. The immediate consequences, also echoed globally, were equally devastating. Winter gripping the land for 2 years, followed by relentless drought, then famine, then waves of plague, and ultimately widespread death. Whole cities, once vibrant centers of life, simply vanished from the map. Civilizations, once thought immutable, crumbled into dust. What could possibly account for such a terrifying near-universal cataclysm? This was the central enigma that launched Keyes' extraordinary investigative journey. His approach was refreshingly unconventional and remarkably comprehensive. He understood that no single discipline held all the answers. To truly piece together the global puzzle, he needed a mosaic of expertise. So from his suburban base, he engaged in extensive consultation, reaching out to an astonishing breadth of knowledge over 80 experts across diverse fields. Imagine the sheer dedication required to coordinate insights from dendrochronologists, those who read the silent stories of tree rings, to specialists in drought and famine, to geologists studying floods, to astrophysicists contemplating cosmic and ecological disasters, to epidemiologists tracing the deadly paths of epidemics, and even to military historians analyzing ancient wars. Each offered a crucial piece of the puzzle, a different lens through which to view the scattered evidence. Beyond this extensive network of living experts, Keyes delved into the dusty archives of the past. He scoured annals and chronicles of the 6th and 7th centuries A.D. from every conceivable global source he could access. Byzantine texts offered glimpses from the heart of the Roman Empire. Chinese imperial records provided an Eastern perspective, and the nascent historical writings from newly emerging cultures contributed their own unique observations. It was a painstaking, often frustrating process, sifting through layers of ancient script, searching for the subtle clues, the fleeting mentions of strange weather, unusual harvests, or unexplained outbreaks. His thesis, which would increasingly solidify with every piece of evidence uncovered, was audacious. This catastrophic climatic event, hidden in plain sight within the historical record of the Dark Ages, was not merely an interesting anomaly, but a fundamental force that profoundly altered the course of human history, shaping nations and religions in ways previously unimagined. The stage was set for a truly global historical detective story, where the silent witnesses of nature would speak louder than any human chronicle. The meticulous archival research and the consultation with a wide array of experts provided David Keyes with crucial pieces of the puzzle, but the truly astonishing breakthrough, the moment when the scattered observations began to coalesce into a coherent narrative, came from an unexpected source: the silent, unassuming witnesses of the natural world. Specifically, it came from trees. The tree ring revolution, as it would come to be known in this context, offered an unparalleled window into the distant past, allowing scientists to reconstruct ancient climates with remarkable precision. The initial pivotal discovery occurred at a conference in 1994, a seemingly ordinary academic gathering that would for Keyes prove anything but. There he encountered Mike Bailey, a dendrochronologist, a scientist who specialized in reading the stories written in the annual growth rings of trees. What Bailey revealed was astonishing. A quiet bomb dropped in the academic world. All tree rings worldwide, without exception, went haywire around the middle of the 6th century. Imagine the implications of such a statement. A global anomaly recorded by living organisms across continents, all pointing to the same narrow window in time. It was the scientific corroboration Keyes had been searching for, a concrete, irrefutable sign that something truly monumental had happened on a global scale. Mike Bailey's pioneering work in tree ring science was itself a story of revolutionary thought and painstaking dedication. Decades prior, as a physics student, he had conceived of what was then a radical idea: that trees could be used as scientific instruments, not just for dating, but for understanding the Earth's climate history. His concept was elegantly simple, yet profoundly powerful. Trees are silent witnesses of the world's changing weather over millennia. Each year, a tree adds a new layer of growth, forming a distinct ring. The width of this ring acts as a natural barometer. A wide ring indicates good growing conditions, ample warmth and rainfall, while a narrow ring signals distress, often due to cold, drought, or other environmental stressors. The genius lay in the precise dating. Every tree has a unique pattern of wide and narrow rings, almost like a barcode specific to its lifespan. By matching these distinctive patterns, sequences from felled trees or ancient timbers could be precisely dated by overlapping them with known chronologies from living trees. Bailey's technological innovation further propelled this field. He invented a computer program capable of matching these complex ring patterns, an invention that was so effective it has since been globally adopted, becoming a fundamental tool for dendrochronologists worldwide. This innovation allowed for the building of comprehensive, incredibly long records of past climates. Laboratories across the globe, particularly in Northern Europe, engaged in painstaking work extending these chronologies backward in time. They would carefully process multiple samples from a single historic building, for instance, overlapping the ring patterns from its timbers with those of older, still living trees, creating continuous chronologies spanning hundreds and then thousands of years. Imagine the patience and precision required to meticulously analyze and cross-reference samples, sometimes taking over a decade for a single region. For Irish scientists, this rigorous data compilation, which took 14 years for their ancient oak records, ultimately yielded an astonishing 7,500 years of annual weather data. This unprecedented insight granted researchers the ability to interrogate any specific calendar year for its tree growth conditions over a wide geographical area, essentially giving them a detailed weather report from the distant past. And what did this interrogation reveal about the mid-6th century Bailey's initial observation, made a decade prior to his meeting with Keys, was particularly striking. Irish oak rings became abnormally narrow in the mid-6th century AD. Specific years, like 540, 541, and 542, showed extremely narrow rings indicating a powerful sustained inhibition of growth. This wasn't a localized blip. It was a severe pervasive stress. Further international collaboration quickly provided confirmatory evidence. A Finnish colleague's data showed an abrupt drop in tree growth in 536 AD, a slight recovery in 537 to 538, only to plummet dramatically again into 542. The pattern was consistent, alarming, and global. David Keyes's outreach to other labs around the world confirmed it. The phenomenon was universal. California's ancient foxtail pines. Those stoic survivors of millennia recorded 535, 536, and 541 as 3 of the 4 worst growth years in the past 2 millennia. The Fitzroya trees in distant Chile registered their greatest summer growth drop in 1,600 years. And in Siberia, the tree rings spoke of a stark 20-year decline in growth during the 530s and 540s, the most severe in the past 1,900 years. The microscopic interpretation of a 536 AD oak ring offered an even more chilling detail. Winter-type cells appeared in summer, and enormously small vessels were distributed throughout the summer growth, strongly suggesting frost damage and extremely cold conditions prevailing for unnaturally long periods. The trees, those silent witnesses, were screaming. The compelling, globally consistent narrative whispered by the tree rings provided undeniable scientific evidence of a profound climatic shift. But a true historical detective always seeks corroboration from multiple independent sources. Mike Bailey, the dendrochronologist, was not only a pioneer in his field, but also possessed a keen understanding of how his scientific data intersected with human history. He had, in fact, archaeological evidence from Ireland that strikingly backed up the climate data, providing a tangible link between the abstract scientific measurements and the lived realities of people in the 6th century. Much of the dated wood that provided the meticulous tree ring chronologies came from an intriguing source. Crannogs, those mysterious wooden island forts scattered across Irish lakes. Imagine these structures often built entirely of timber rising from the water as artificial islands. They weren't idyllic retreats. They were refuges constructed as archaeological evidence suggests during times of trouble and clan warfare. These crannogs, by their very nature, were desperate measures built to provide security in an increasingly insecure world. A visit to the remains of a crannog near Omagh, as described by Keyes, would offer a tangible connection to this past. Imagine gazing down into the dark, still waters, discerning the submerged timbers that once formed the foundations of a desperate stronghold. These ancient, waterlogged timbers, once part of someone's defense against a chaotic world, now offered up their precise botanical diary to modern science. The significance of these crannogs in the context of the 535 AD catastrophe is profound. Mike Bailey's research revealed a striking pattern. The mid-6th century marked a dramatic increase, almost the beginning of crannog construction across Ireland. This wasn't a coincidental architectural trend. Bailey directly attributed this surge in defensive construction to the hostile conditions unleashed by the climatic disaster. When the world outside became colder, hungrier, and more volatile, people retreated to these fortified islands, seeking safety in isolation. It's a stark illustration of how environmental stress translates directly into human behavior, leading to a scramble for security and a hardening of societal boundaries. The consequences for daily life in Ireland, already hinted at by the tree rings, were now amplified by archaeological context. A decade of really bad conditions, starting in 536 AD, meant more than just narrow tree rings. It meant significantly reduced sunlight, a sun that refused to warm the earth, and an insidious cold that settled over the land. The direct result was widespread catastrophic crop failures. Imagine the despair of looking out at your fields knowing that the grain that was supposed to feed your family simply wasn't growing or was stunted and withered. The very basis of your existence had been pulled out from under you. With agricultural sustenance failing, populations would have been forced to revert to more primitive, less reliable methods of survival. Fishing, often a supplemental activity, would have become a primary means of avoiding starvation. Hunting for those with the skills and access to game would have become a desperate necessity. These shifts from a settled agricultural existence to a precarious hunter-gatherer mode of survival would have put significant strain on communities accustomed to the predictability of their harvests. It wasn't just physical hardship. It was a profound cultural and psychological shock. The rhythms of life, once dictated by the predictable cycle of planting and harvest, were now dictated by scarcity and uncertainty. The overall sentiment gleaned from the silence of the trees and the desperate architecture of the crannogs was stark and unequivocal. Things would have been fairly bleak here. This archaeological corroboration added a layer of human tangible reality to the scientific data, making the climate anomaly not just an academic curiosity, but a lived, agonizing experience. With the compelling evidence of a global climatic catastrophe firmly established by the silent testimony of the trees and the desperate scramble for survival etched into the archaeological record. The next, and arguably most crucial question for our historical detectives, became what caused it. What could unleash such a profound and widespread disruption upon the Earth? Scientists, in their quest for answers, considered three primary planet-altering possibilities: a colossal asteroid strike, the fiery descent of a comet, or the explosive fury of a massive volcanic eruption. Each had the potential to dramatically alter the atmosphere and plunge the world into a period of climatic hardship. To unravel this part of the mystery, David Keyes turned to the experts at the Los Alamos Laboratory, the very same minds that pondered the atmospheric consequences of nuclear strikes and, more pertinently, for our narrative cosmic collisions. Their calculations were stark and precise. For an asteroid impact to generate a climatic catastrophe lasting for decades, the kind witnessed in the 6th century, it would have to be a truly enormous object, a big thing measuring at least 4 kilometers across, slamming into the Earth with unimaginable force. If the culprit were a comet, which is less dense than an asteroid, it would need to be even larger, a 6-kilometer-wide Leviathan, to achieve the same devastating effect. Imagine for a moment such an event. 2 days out, you might notice a faint, unfamiliar star barely visible to the naked eye. 30 minutes before impact, it would become the brightest object in your sky, blindingly brilliant, growing with terrifying speed. The impact itself, from the moment it pierced the atmosphere to its shattering conclusion at sea level, would take a mere 8 seconds. What follows would be a brilliant fireball, an incandescent flash visible across continents. And then, the sound. Because the object would be traveling at 20 times the speed of sound, the first sound you would hear, a gigantic, deafening roar, would arrive minutes after the flash, a delayed, terrifying echo of the unimaginable destruction that had just occurred. Such an event would leave an indelible mark, not just on the planet, but on the collective memory of humanity. Yet despite these dramatic simulations, the evidence for a cosmic impact in the 6th century simply wasn't there. Historical records, those ancient annals and chronicles meticulously searched by Keyes, contained no mention of such a spectacular celestial event. No civilization anywhere on Earth recorded a star growing to blinding brilliance, a monumental flash, or a cataclysmic boom that rattled the very foundations of their world. Furthermore, the geological record remained stubbornly silent. If a 4-kilometer asteroid or a 6-kilometer comet had struck the Earth, it would have left behind an enormous impact crater, a geological scar that would be unmistakable. That's just yesterday in geologic time, as one expert put it, meaning such a crater would be easily identifiable today. And if, as is statistically more likely, given Earth's composition, the impact occurred in the ocean, which covers 70% of the planet's surface, the consequences would be equally unmissable. A massive ocean impact would generate initial waves miles high, followed by humongous tidal waves that would swamp coasts for miles inland, obliterating coastal ecosystems and civilizations. Again, no historical records from the 6th century describe such an event. Nor is there any significant interruption to coastal plant growth identifiable in the botanical or geological records of the time. The lack of evidence was in itself compelling evidence against a singular massive cosmic impact. While the Big Bang impact theory was largely discarded, Mike Bailey, ever the imaginative scientist, did briefly entertain a more subtle cosmic alternative, a fragmented comet theory. This concept proposed a bombardment event involving a large number of smaller comet pieces exploding in the atmosphere. He drew an analogy to the 1908 Tunguska event over Siberia, a single airburst explosion of about 20 megatons that flattened vast swaths of forest. While Tunguska caused massive local destruction, it lacked enough microfine particles to affect global weather. Bailey speculated that a shower of such events strategically dispersed could collectively create a global dust veil. He even tentatively linked this theory to the King Arthur legends, particularly Arthur's alleged death around 539 or 542 AD, which aligns with the climatic catastrophe. The legends describe his kingdom reduced to a wasteland with terrible blows from the skies. Bailey wondered if Arthur's death might symbolize devastation caused by a shattering comet, and even connected it to the Celtic god Lugh, a bright solar deity with a long arm who delivered terrible blows, a tantalizing if ultimately speculative mythological link to a comet. However, as compelling as these narratives were, hard scientific proof was still elusive. The real smoking gun, it turned out, lay frozen in time deep within the Earth's polar caps. With the grand cataclysmic visions of asteroid and comet impacts largely dismissed for lack of concrete evidence, the historical detective shifted focus. If the global dimming and subsequent climatic chaos weren't caused by a celestial visitor, then the answer had to come from within the Earth itself. The most likely terrestrial culprit capable of injecting vast quantities of material into the atmosphere was a supervolcanic eruption. And the definitive clue, the smoking gun that finally unmasked the true cause of the 536 AD catastrophe, was discovered in the most remote, pristine environments on Earth, the polar ice caps. Imagine multinational teams braving the brutal cold of Greenland and Antarctica, operating specialized drills that bore down through thousands of feet of ice. Their mission to extract pristine 1,000-meter deep ice columns like giant frozen geological core samples. The principle behind this methodology is remarkably similar to that of tree rings, yet it offers an even more direct link to the Earth's ancient atmosphere. Just as trees add a new growth layer each season, polar ice caps accumulate a fresh layer of snow each year. This snow, compacted over millennia, forms layers of ice, each one preserving a meticulous record of the atmospheric content at the time it fell. What you find in these ice layers, trapped dust, volcanic ash, even tiny air bubbles, is a direct frozen archive of past atmospheric chemistry, invaluable for cross-referencing with other historical records like tree rings, deep-sea sediments, and lake deposits. It's like having a perfectly preserved annual diary of the Earth's upper atmosphere written in ice. The crucial difference between a cosmic impact and a volcanic eruption from an ice core perspective lies in their distinct chemical signatures. If a cosmic impact had occurred, scientists would expect to find elevated traces of rare chemical elements such as iridium, which is far more abundant in extraterrestrial objects than in Earth's crust. But if a massive volcanic eruption was the cause, the telltale signature would be an excess of sulfuric acid. When a volcano explodes with immense force, it hurls vast quantities of sulfur dioxide gas high into the stratosphere. This gas then reacts with water vapor to form tiny aerosols of sulfuric acid, which are then scattered worldwide by high-altitude winds. Eventually, these acidic aerosols fall back to Earth, mixed in rain or snow, and become permanently locked away in the ice layers at the poles. Finding a significant sustained spike in sulfates in the ice cores would be unequivocal proof of a major volcanic event. The critical analysis came from Professor Hammer's team working on a new Greenland core, specifically from the 530s AD. Their process was painstakingly precise. Each section of the ice core was meticulously cleaned to remove any contamination, then sliced into thin 5-centimeter lengths. These segments were then melted, and the resulting water was fed into automated analysis equipment producing chromatograms, graphical representations of chemical concentrations. The results, when they came in, were decisive. They found a significant sulfate peak that began to increase dramatically around 535 AD. This wasn't a subtle rise. It was an unequivocal indication of sulfuric acid entering the atmosphere in vast quantities. The scale of the finding was equally compelling. It was a huge amount of sulfate, far greater than anything else in that section of the ice core record, and its elevated presence lasted for several years. This confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt that a major eruption had occurred. But for a climatic event to truly impact the entire globe, it needs to leave its mark in both hemispheres. So the search for confirmation extended to the Antarctic. Existing data from Antarctic ice cores, while perhaps less precisely dated in some older records, showed similar volcanic signals. The combined evidence, a huge sulfur spike around the mid-6th century from both the Greenland and Antarctic poles, strongly suggested that volcanic ash and aerosols distributed globally were indeed the primary cause of the widespread global climate damage observed in the tree rings and historical records. This finding also provided broader context for volcanism. While massive climate downturns like 536 AD might seem extraordinary to us today, historical and geological records indicate they have occurred roughly every 1,000 years or so due to large volcanic eruptions. Modern volcanologists, in fact, express surprise at how quiet the last 100 years have been in terms of significant volcanic activity, contrasting it with the lumps of intense activity periods of 20-30 years, with multiple large eruptions seen in previous centuries, such as the 19th, 17th, and 18th. This period of relative calm in recent history might give us a false sense of security. It's even speculated that the vivid red sunsets often depicted in Turner's paintings might not have been purely artistic preference, but a reflection of actual skies made vibrant and dramatic by the presence of significant volcanic dust from contemporary eruptions. To cause a truly global dust veil, an eruption must occur near the equator, as equatorial winds are uniquely capable of distributing dust across both hemispheres. With over 200 active volcanoes globally, Keyes and his team, using this crucial geographical filter, identified over 90 equatorial volcanoes as potential culprits. The net was closing in, with the polar ice cores unequivocally pointing towards a massive equatorial volcanic eruption as the culprit. The final piece of David Keyes' detective work was to pinpoint the specific volcano the prime suspect in this global act of environmental sabotage. The geographical focus quickly narrowed. Looking at a map of the world's active volcanoes, the highest concentration of large tropical volcanoes, precisely those capable of global atmospheric disruption, lies in a fiery arc straddling Southeast Asia, a region encompassing parts of India, Sumatra, Java, the Philippines, and Japan. This was the hunting ground, the most likely origin of the devastating 535 AD event, and it was here in the ancient Chinese written accounts that Keyes found a tantalizing, almost too perfect clue: the loud bang. Ancient Chinese sources known for their meticulous record-keeping contained a mysterious entry from February 535 AD describing a loud bang, a huge thunderous sound coming from the southwest, with a crucial addendum: no mention of lightning. The significance of this seemingly innocuous detail is immense. Thunder always implies lightning, but here was a vast, thunderous sound, without its accompanying flash. This pointed directly towards the Indonesian volcanic area, south and west of China. For the Chinese, who rarely recorded mere sounds, it must have been an exceptional one-off event to warrant its inclusion in their historical annals. It was a singular, profound acoustic phenomenon that defied natural explanation, unless it was a sound of truly geological proportions, 22 vượt quá 1.000 ký tự. Yet another piece of the puzzle emerged from a less scientific but equally captivating source, Indonesian cultural lore. Written records from the immediate vicinity of the suspected eruption are scarce, understandably, given the chaotic nature of such an event and the challenges of historical preservation in tropical climates. But a fascinating clue surfaced in the Book of Kings, a Javanese text compiled in the 1850s from far older ancient sources in Solo, Central Java. This ancient compilation described an extraordinary event occurring in the mid-first millennium AD, a description so vivid and specific it sent shivers down the spines of modern geophysicists. The text recounted a mighty thunder which was answered by a furious shaking of the earth, pitch darkness, thunder and lightning, and then came forth a furious gale together with a hard rain, a deadly storm darkening the entire world. The description then escalated to a truly catastrophic aftermath. In no time there came a great flood. When the water subsided, it could be seen that the island of Java had been split in two, thus creating the island of Sumatra. Geophysicists who examined this ancient account were stunned. They confirmed that the story accurately describes a major volcanic eruption of cataclysmic scale, complete with seismic activity, atmospheric effects, and even tsunamis and massive geological alteration. The detailed, precise nature of the description, they argued, would have been exceedingly difficult to invent, strongly suggesting it was a genuine, albeit mythologized, remembrance of an actual event. The geographical clue embedded in the Javanese text was perhaps the most definitive, the splitting of Java to create Sumatra. And in that specific area between Sumatra and Java, there is only one major volcano known for such colossal island-splitting eruptions, the infamous Krakatoa. This legendary name, synonymous with one of history's most devastating eruptions in 1883, suddenly became the prime suspect for the 535 AD catastrophe. With all the evidence converging on Krakatoa, the next crucial step was direct archaeological and geological confirmation. Could scientists find tangible proof of a massive 6th century eruption at this notorious volcanic site? David Keyes turned to Harold Sigurdsson, an Icelandic volcanologist with extensive experience studying Krakatoa. 5 years prior, Sigurdsson had already made a significant discovery during his research there, a deposit layer from a major eruption far larger than the famous 1883 event, but its date remained unknown. His goal now was precise dating to find charcoal within this ancient eruption layer or in the layers immediately above or below it to carbon date the event. Imagine the location. Krakatoa itself, a cluster of uninhabited rainforest islands located west of Java, just south of the equator. This was the site of the infamous 1883 eruption, an event that killed 36,000 people and sent a sound wave around the world multiple times. Today, a new volatile island called Anak Krakatoa, the child of Krakatoa, has formed entirely since 1883. It is a constantly growing, dangerous 1,000-foot-high volcanic island, perpetually active. During Sigurdsson's expedition, the team witnessed its activity firsthand, regularly hurling house-sized rocks and molten lava, a constant noisy reminder of the immense forces simmering beneath. It was, as Keyes describes it, a noisy and quarrelsome child, a restless progeny of its cataclysmic parent. The history of Krakatoa suggests a recurring cycle. The volcano grows out of the sea through smaller eruptions, gradually building up until it becomes too large, at which point it violently blows itself apart in a massive self-destructive explosion. Illustrations from the 1920s had already suggested the existence of an ancient Krakatoa that exploded around 535 AD, leaving behind the islands that would then slowly grow back to form the 1883 Krakatoa. More recently, Sigurdsson's earlier sonar surveys had provided compelling evidence of this ancient behemoth, clear outlines of a caldera, a giant crater on the ocean floor far larger than the one created in 1883, located to the north and east of the modern islands. The pieces were falling into place. The expedition's methodology was clear. Find charcoal. Charcoal forms when hot lava or pyroclastic flows instantly carbonize trees and other organic material. If found within the major eruption layer, it could be directly carbon dated to pinpoint the event's precise timing. The challenges, however, were immense. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, a desperate search in a tropical active volcanic environment where such delicate organic material is quickly degraded or buried. And of course, the environment itself was inherently dangerous, with Anak Krakatoa constantly rumbling and spitting. The fortnight-long expedition to Krakatoa yielded results that, while not immediately definitive, were ultimately highly persuasive. They managed to collect only 10 charcoal samples, a testament to the difficulty of the search. Crucially, none of these were large enough to be directly from the major eruption layer itself. However, they found good samples from the layer immediately above the main eruption deposit, which when dated came in at 1215 AD. They also found a few samples from layers below the catastrophic eruption, dating back to a much older event around 6600 BC. This indirect dating, combined with all the other evidence, allowed Sigurdsson to draw his final powerful conclusion. The 535 AD event, as indicated by the ice cores, tree rings, and historical accounts, falls marvelously right in the middle of that window of unidentified major eruptions between the 6600 BC event and the 1215 AD one. Key's 5 years of relentless detective work, cross-referencing ancient texts with cutting-edge scientific data, had reached its triumphant conclusion. The overwhelming evidence pointed to a massive tropical eruption around 535 AD, and Krakatoa was beyond a reasonable doubt the most likely culprit. The quiet, persistent efforts of scientists and historians working together had uncovered the hidden truth of the worst year in history, revealing an event that, though unseen and largely forgotten, profoundly shaped the destinies of civilizations across the globe. With the culprit identified, the legendary Krakatoa simmering for centuries before its colossal eruption, we can now truly delve into the heart of the catastrophe, the Big Bang itself, the unleashing of forces almost beyond human comprehension. The volcano that roared to life in 535 AD was not merely active. It was a titan producing a dust cloud so vast, so pervasive that it enveloped the entire world. This wasn't just a local disturbance. It was one of the most dangerous, most spectacular displays of raw geological power ever witnessed by humanity, even if those witnesses struggled to comprehend its full scale. To truly grasp the magnitude of this ancient event, imagine the sheer force involved. Scientific simulations, incorporating data gleaned from the tree rings, the ice cores, and those chilling eyewitness accounts of the sun's dimming estimate that the power generated by Krakatoa in 535 AD was equivalent to around 2,000 million Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs. Yes, you heard that correctly. 2 billion such bombs. This was not merely a large eruption. It was tens, hundreds of times larger than any volcano that's ever been witnessed, in recorded history. It's a number that almost defies imagination, a force that literally shook the planet. Dr. Ken Willits and his team of scientists, feeding all available data into a supercomputer, painstakingly reconstructed the phases of this ancient cataclysm. The eruption's location, crucial for its global impact, was in the Sunda Straits, precisely positioned between the large landmasses of Java and Sumatra. Imagine standing, or perhaps being hurled near the epicenter. The initial phase would have been a truly horrifying spectacle. A giant incandescent fountain of molten rock, a fiery geyser of magma and ash, towering thousands of feet, perhaps even miles over the surrounding countryside. This was not a slow-motion geological event. This was instantaneous explosive violence. But Krakatoa had another even more terrifying trick up its sleeve. The simulations suggest a secondary, perhaps even more destructive explosion. It's likely that a new crack or fissure opened, allowing the vast cold waters of the surrounding sea to rush into the volcano's superheated magma chamber. The effect of water meeting molten rock at such immense pressures and temperatures is simple yet devastating, an absolutely vast explosion. This was not just a fizzle. This was the equivalent of detonating an immense steam bomb. The resulting plume, a colossal column of magma dust and superheated ash, would have shot upwards, piercing the sky to an astonishing height of 30 miles well into the stratosphere. From this terrifying fountain, ash would have rained down, blanketing forests and fields for 1,000 miles around, turning verdant landscapes into gray, silent canvases of destruction. And then the global effect. These towering clouds of steam gas and ash, having been hurled so high, would begin to spread laterally at immense altitudes, appearing like a colossal gray-white mushroom cloud, expanding outwards, slowly, inexorably across the planet. Their primary function, from an environmental perspective, was simple: to block out the sun. In all directions across continents and oceans, the sun's comforting warmth and light would be significantly diminished. Imagine days turning into a perpetual twilight, the sky perpetually veiled, as if a colossal unseen filter had been placed between the Earth and its life-giving star. This immediate environmental fallout was the natural equivalent of nuclear winter, a chilling preview of what such an apocalyptic scenario would entail. The consequences were swift and grim. Temperatures plummeted globally, plunging regions into unseasonable cold. But the disruption didn't stop there. Without the sun's full strength to heat the oceans, the delicate hydrological cycle of the planet was profoundly disrupted. Less water evaporated from the vast surfaces of the seas, leading to a progressively drier atmosphere. And a drier atmosphere means less rainfall. The direct chilling consequence, widespread droughts and devastating famines, began to grip communities across the world. The paradox, a cruel twist of nature's knife, was that often at the end of such major droughts, when the desiccated land could no longer absorb sudden downpours, massive destructive floods would occur, turning parched earth into swirling torrents. And indeed, this too appears to have happened in the aftermath of Krakatoa's fury, compounding the misery for millions. While the earth groaned under the atmospheric changes wrought by Krakatoa, and unseen dust continued to filter the sun's light, human societies were entering their own periods of profound crisis. Perhaps no civilization felt the immediate devastating secondary impacts of the 535 AD catastrophe more acutely than the Roman Empire, specifically, its eastern half centered in the magnificent city of Constantinople. In 535 AD, under the ambitious and visionary Emperor Justinian, the late Roman Empire was far from a dying entity. It was, in fact, flourishing a vibrant hub of Mediterranean culture, commerce, and intellectual life. Imagine its capital, Constantinople, a glittering metropolis, its harbors teeming with ships from across the known world, its markets overflowing with exotic goods, its forums echoing with debates, and its grand Hagia Sophia, then relatively new, standing as a testament to imperial power and artistic brilliance. This was a sophisticated, well-organized society, seemingly robust and secure. But beneath this veneer of prosperity, a silent, invisible threat was brewing, exacerbated by the very climatic changes we've discussed. Just a few years after the sun began to dim in 542 AD, something horrific struck at the very heart of this glittering empire. It arrived insidiously, a whisper of illness that quickly escalated into a terrifying roar of death. We have a harrowing first-hand account from a contemporary observer, the monk Evagrius, who described the plague's progression with chilling detail. He recounted how it often began in the head, causing the eyes to become bloodshot, and the face to swell, distorting the familiar features of loved ones. From there, the affliction would descend to the throat, a brutal constriction that stifled breath and made swallowing an agonizing ordeal, often leading to a swift, suffocating death. Yet the plague was capricious in its manifestation. For others, the initial symptoms were different. A severe, unrelenting flowing of the bowels, an internal unraveling that drained the body of its strength. Some, Evagrius observed, developed sores, which gave rise to great fevers, their bodies consumed by an inferno of internal heat, leading to death within 2 or 3 days. In a cruel twist of fate, many of these victims retained their lucidity, their minds tragically clear, even as their robust bodies withered and failed. Others, however, were spared this conscious agony, mercifully losing their senses before the final inevitable release. The monk's detailed, though agonizing observations leave little doubt, for modern epidemiologists Evagrius was describing for the very first time in recorded history a massive outbreak of bubonic plague. This wasn't merely a localized epidemic. This was the inaugural wave of what would become known as the Justinian Plague, a pandemic that would sweep across continents. Modern scientific understanding now draws a chilling link between outbreaks of bubonic plague and significant climate changes. The mechanism, though complex, centers on the flea, the primary vector for the Yersinia pestis bacteria that causes plague. The plague bacteria, it has been discovered, form fibrin clots in the flea's gut, effectively blocking its feeding mechanism, but only when the temperature is below 25 degrees Celsius, 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Above this threshold, the bacillus passes through the flea's gut without causing a blockage, making the flea a less efficient vector. The cooler conditions that followed the 535 AD eruption, the very spring without mildness and a summer without heat, that afflicted regions across the globe, would have created ideal temperatures for the plague bacillus to thrive within its flea hosts, directly triggering the onset and accelerating the spread of the disease. It was as if the environmental chill had opened a lethal window for the invisible predator. According to Evagrius, the plague's insidious journey began in Ethiopia, a region of Africa. This aligns with modern scientific and historical confirmation. The Great Lakes area of Central Africa is recognized as one of the oldest foci of plague activity. Normally, the scorching heat of Africa would keep the disease in check, limiting its ability to form those crucial fibrin clots in the fleas. But the global cooling of 535 to 536 AD would have transformed these normally hot regions into lethal breeding grounds for the plague. From Africa, the disease found its way onto the intricate network of ancient trade routes. Ships laden with exotic goods also carried uninvited passengers' rats. And on these rats, fleas. Sailors' unwitting carriers became the human vectors. The plague easily spread up the coast, making its first devastating landfall at Alexandria in Egypt, a major port city. From there it moved with terrifying speed and efficiency deep into the heart of the Roman Empire, ready to unleash its full fury upon Constantinople. The stage was set, and the climate-induced conditions were ripe for devastation. When the Justinian Plague finally struck Constantinople in 542 AD, the impact was catastrophic, transforming the vibrant capital of the Roman Empire into a city of unspeakable horror. Imagine the scale of death. Over 10,000 bodies had to be disposed of daily, not for a single week, but week after week after week. This wasn't just a localized tragedy. It was a relentless, grinding obliteration of life day after horrifying day. The city, once a marvel of urban planning and infrastructure, crumbled under the sheer volume of the dead. Normal burial practices became impossible. Accounts from the time paint a grim picture of improvisation and desperation. Bodies were thrown into the sea from specially designed boats, their wakes disturbed by the silent, grim cargo. City wall towers, magnificent fortifications built to protect the living, were repurposed into macabre repositories crammed full of corpses until they overflowed their battlements, no longer guardians, but silent witnesses to mass death. Cisterns, those vital underground reservoirs of fresh water, became mass graves, their life-giving purpose perverted into a morbid receptacle for the fallen. Even private orchards, once symbols of domestic comfort and provision, were dug up their fertile earth, disturbed to accommodate the ceaseless demands of the dead. The atmosphere in Constantinople was one of utter chaos and pandemonium. The very air of Europe's biggest city, a place that once hummed with the energy of commerce and culture, now stank for month after month after month. It was a pervasive, nauseating stench of decay and despair, a constant, sickening reminder of the horror that had gripped every street, every home. You might try to escape it, but the smell would cling to your clothes, to your hair, an inescapable shroud of death. The scale of death was so immense that one contemporary recorded that counting simply stopped when the dead reached 250,000. The sheer numbers became too overwhelming to tally, too vast to comprehend, a testament to a loss of life that defied quantification. As people gripped by terror fled the stricken city, they unwittingly carried the plague with them, acting as human vectors of the disease. The pestilence spread to towns, villages, and isolated farms throughout the Roman Empire, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The result was the deaths of untold millions, a demographic catastrophe that fundamentally reshaped the social fabric, the economy, and the very administrative capacity of one of the world's most powerful empires. The Justinian Plague, a direct consequence of the climate anomaly that created ideal conditions for its spread, stripped the empire of its manpower, its economic vitality, and its morale. This vulnerability, however, was not solely due to the plague's virulence. The Roman Empire's elite played an unwitting role in its spread. The 6th century saw an enormous trade in African ivory, driven by the luxurious demands of the elite class. Imagine hundreds of tons of ivory harvested from distant African lands brought into the empire annually. This wasn't for practical purposes. It was primarily destined for luxury furniture, high-status objects, and elaborate diplomatic gifts exchanged between magistrates and foreign dignitaries. This immense European and Mediterranean greed for ivory directly fueled and sustained extensive trade routes with Africa. These very routes traversed by ships, their cargo holds inevitably containing rats, and staffed by sailors who would dock in plague-ridden ports, inadvertently became the superhighways for the bubonic plague's journey from Africa to Constantinople. The demands of an elite class, their desire for exotic luxuries, thus created a systemic vulnerability, facilitating widespread societal devastation that disproportionately affected the general populace. It's a chilling example of how the desires of a few can have catastrophic unintended consequences, for many illustrating the intricate, often unseen web of interconnectedness that characterizes human societies, even ancient ones. The Justinian Plague, then, was not merely a biological event, but a profound societal wound deepened and spread by the very structures of luxury and trade that defined the Roman elite. The 535 AD catastrophe, in its relentless reshuffling of geopolitical landscapes, didn't just weaken established empires or decimate distant cities. It also sculpted the very foundations of new societies and new world religions. We have already touched upon the Avars and their remarkable journey, but let's delve a little deeper into their societal structure and the nuanced ways in which the climate crisis fundamentally altered their destiny. The Avars, as we've noted, were the overlords of the region of Mongolia before 535 AD, asserting their dominance over surrounding tribes. This wasn't a loose confederation. It was a clear social hierarchy, with the Avars embodying a type of nomadic elite, their power enforced by their superior horsemanship and military prowess. Their social practices, while shocking to Chinese chroniclers who found their habits of never bathing or washing their clothing, and their practice of having the women lick them dry to clean dishes as outrageous, were not merely eccentricities. These were deeply ingrained cultural norms forged by their nomadic existence and adapted to their specific environment. They highlight a stark contrast in hygiene and social customs compared to more settled agricultural civilizations. Imagine the practicalities of trying to maintain bathing rituals or extensive laundry in a harsh, semi-arid steppe environment where water was a precious, often scarce commodity. Their practices were not born of ignorance, but of pragmatism, a functional adaptation to their unique social structure and environmental realities. At the heart of their society, providing both military advantage and sustenance, was their horse-centric economy. Their very identity was equestrian. Their social and military power was intrinsically linked to their highly advanced horsemanship and the constant availability of their primary resource pasture for horses. This specialized economic structure, while granting them a decisive military edge, also rendered their entire society acutely vulnerable when the ecosystem supporting their primary resource collapsed due to climate change. The narrative here is a stark ecological lesson. A specialized societal foundation, while incredibly efficient and powerful in stable conditions, can become a fatal weakness when those conditions are fundamentally altered. The vulnerability of their horses to prolonged drought and poor vegetation translated directly into a systemic crisis for the Avars. Without healthy horses, they lacked food mobility and their formidable military might. The dramatic defeat and subsequent 4,000-mile refugee caravan westward was not merely a military retreat. It was a forced, profound societal reorganization. From dominant overlords, they were reduced to displaced migrants struggling for survival. This desperate trek, however, was also a testament to their resilience and the enduring power of their specialized knowledge. As they traveled, their horse technology, their mastery of cavalry tactics, remained superior to anything they encountered on their arduous journey. and so they slowly re-established a new form of dominance, eventually arriving at the frontiers of the weakened Roman Empire not as broken refugees, but as a newly reconstituted force. Their re-establishment of power and their subsequent harassment of the Romans demanding immense amounts of gold illustrates how a profound ecological shock can trigger not just collapse, but also dramatic forced societal transformations and the re-emergence of power in new unexpected forms. It's a chilling reminder that environmental catastrophes don't just erase history. They often redirect it, sometimes empowering those who learn to adapt most effectively to the new harsh realities. Let us now turn our gaze back to the magnificent city of Teotihuacan, whose enigmatic ruins speak volumes of a grand civilization brought to its knees by the very forces we are exploring. This primate city of 125,000, as we've noted, was not merely a large settlement. It was a complex hierarchical urban structure that undoubtedly possessed a distinct elite and a powerful priestly class. Imagine the immense resources required to sustain such a vast population to construct its colossal pyramids and intricate urban fabric. The management of these resources, the organization of labor, the maintenance of social order, all would have been the purview of this ruling stratum. Central to the legitimacy and power of Teotihuacan's elite, particularly its priestly class, was their perceived ability to mediate with the divine forces of nature. In an agrarian society heavily dependent on rainfall, the priestly class was implicitly responsible for ensuring the flow of essential resources, most notably, bringing the rain and making the springs flow. This wasn't just a spiritual role. It was a practical, tangible function that underpinned the entire social contract. When the rains came, when the springs flowed, and the crops flourished, the elite's power and wisdom were affirmed. This demonstrates a profound societal arrangement where the very legitimacy of the ruling class was directly tied to their perceived success in maintaining environmental prosperity. For the common person in Teotihuacan, their leaders were not just political figures. They were conduits to the very forces that determined life and death. As the devastating drought worsened, as spring flow diminished to a trickle, and the life-giving rains became a distant memory, the common populace began to experience a profound crisis of faith. Their fields withered, their children sickened, and the very promises of their leaders seemed to evaporate with the scarce water. They lost confidence in this priestly class, in their ability to deliver on the most fundamental of needs. This was not a subtle shift in political allegiance. It was a profound breakdown in the social and political legitimacy of the ruling elite, a direct consequence of their perceived failure during an environmental crisis. The social contract was broken, and the once unquestioning trust in the powerful was replaced by desperation and resentment. As we observe the dramatic unraveling of societies across the globe, it becomes increasingly clear that the cataclysm of 535 AD was not merely a destructive force, but also a strange, often cruel catalyst for profound new beginnings. Nowhere is this more evident than in Britain, a land already in the throes of significant change in the mid-6th century. Here, the vacuum left by the departing Romans a century earlier had led to a complex, often brutal struggle for supremacy. The island was fundamentally divided, a sharp cultural and societal schism between the native Celtic Britons who held sway in the western and central parts of the island, and the Anglo-Saxon invaders whose settlements dominated the eastern coasts. These were not merely geographical distinctions. They represented distinct social and cultural entities, each with their own languages, customs, and crucially for our story, their own external connections. 16 vượt quá 1.000 ký tự. 102 vượt quá 1.000 ký tự. This grim vacuum born of disease and environmental hardship opened a chillingly pragmatic opportunity for the Anglo-Saxon peoples. They were comparatively less affected by this initial wave of the plague. And so they began to expand westward, not necessarily through massive pitched battles against a robust enemy, but by simply moving into these partially empty lands. It was less a conquest and more a demographic filling of a void. The very ground emptied by pestilence was simply there for the taking, ready to be settled by those who had, by sheer luck of their trade routes, been spared the worst of the mortality. 22 vượt quá 1.000 ký tự. Our journey through the profound impacts of 535 AD now leads us back to the Arabian Peninsula, where amidst a landscape already defined by stark beauty and harsh realities, the climatic catastrophe ignited a different kind of transformation, one that would birth a major world religion. At the southern tip of Arabia, in what is now Yemen, lay a civilization whose very existence was a triumph of human ingenuity over nature, the kingdom of Himyar. At the beginning of the 6th century, this was the greatest power in the region, a sophisticated society whose prosperity, and indeed its survival, depended entirely on one colossal piece of engineering, the Marib Dam. Imagine this structure, a feat of ancient hydraulic engineering stretching an astonishing 2,000 feet long. It was not merely a wall. It was a complex system feeding hundreds of miles of intricate canals that transformed the arid landscape into a verdant agricultural paradise supporting a thriving population. For generations, the rhythmic flow of water through these canals would have been the very pulse of their daily lives, the guarantor of their sustenance and stability. But within a few short years of the 535 AD eruption, the climatic chaos reached Yemen. First came the relentless drought, parching the land, drying up the reservoirs, and putting immense strain on the dam's capacity. Then, in a cruel twist of environmental irony, the long drought was followed by a succession of violent storms and flash floods. These deluges, rather than replenishing the land, gently attacked the dam with destructive force, weakening its immense structure. You can almost picture the frantic, desperate attempts to repair it, the communities rallying to mend the breaches, their efforts meticulously recorded on contemporary inscriptions. One great inscription, from 542 AD, commemorates the valiant rebuilding by the ruler Abraha, a testament to the immense value placed on this life-sustaining infrastructure. Yet a series of such inscriptions after a few hundred years simply ceases. The dam, weakened beyond repair by the relentless assault of extreme weather, was abandoned. Its intricate network of canals, once channels of life, lay to waste, gradually consumed by the encroaching desert sands. The consequence was the utter ruin of Yemen. Its vast, agriculturally rich heartland, dependent on the dam, withered. Its population, facing starvation, had no choice but to migrate. Imagine the upheaval, the immense societal relocation as entire communities packed their meager belongings and embarked on arduous journeys seeking new areas for survival. This forced displacement led to the emergence of new regional power bases, particularly around the burgeoning settlements of Medina and Mecca, which would soon play a pivotal role in history. It was into this profoundly reshaped, turbulent world that in 570 AD the Prophet Muhammad was born in Mecca. His formative years and the subsequent rise of Islam occurred in precisely the Mecca-Medina area regions that gained immense prominence as destinations for these displaced populations. The growth of Medina as a political and social center was crucial to early Islam, a direct consequence of the demographic shifts triggered by the climate-induced collapse of Yemen. Even Muhammad's own family, the Quraysh, rose to prominence amidst this chaos. In a period of widespread drought and famine when securing food was paramount, Muhammad's ancestors took on the critical role of importing and providing food for the population. This ability to secure and distribute essential resources during a time of extreme scarcity became a significant claim to fame and to status for his family, granting them immense social influence and trust within the community. It was a new form of social leadership born not of traditional aristocratic lineage, but of practical necessity and vital service during a crisis. Muhammad's revolutionary message resonated with immense power in this context. The ancient world was gripped by a profound period of upheaval and disturbance. You could feel an apocalyptic atmosphere hanging heavy in the air. The mighty Roman Empire, which had dominated for 800 years, seemed to be tottering, weakened by plague and barbarian incursions. War, revolution, and societal collapse were not abstract concepts. They were daily realities. Political certainties of the world were collapsing around everybody's ears. No one seemed sure of the future. It was a very, very unsettled time to live, a world searching for answers, for new meaning, for stability. Keyes argues compellingly that all these factors, the environmental collapse, the mass migrations, the shifting power dynamics, the rise of new forms of leadership based on crisis management, and the pervasive sense of societal uncertainty, all feed into the early evolution of Islam. The 535 AD eruption, then, was not just an environmental event. It was a profound, indirect catalyst for the birth of a new world religion, reshaping the spiritual and political landscape of the Middle East, and ultimately, the world. Having meticulously uncovered the scientific origins of the 535 AD catastrophe and traced its profound, multifaceted impacts across diverse civilizations, from the Roman Empire to Teotihuacan, from the Mongolian steppe to the Arabian Peninsula, it is time to draw some enduring lessons. This forgotten worst year in history was far more than a mere historical curiosity. It was a potent catalyst for change, a moment that profoundly disturbs the status quo and allows history to reform itself all over the world. In essence, 535 AD acted as a chillingly effective interface between the ancient world and the world we live in today. It marks a pivotal hinge point where the forces unleashed by a single natural event shattered established orders, paving the way for the emergence of modern nations, new social structures, and even new world religions. Một cụm 36 vượt quá 1.000 ký tự. The story of 535 AD also serves as a potent, if somewhat unsettling, reminder of modern societal vulnerability. The idea of another massive volcanic eruption is not fantasy. It is, in geological terms, long overdue. Consider the active supervolcanoes dormant beneath our feet. Yellowstone in the United States, Long Valley Caldera in California, or the Campi Flegrei in Italy. These are not mere geological curiosities. They are ticking time bombs capable of unleashing environmental devastation on a scale similar to or even greater than 535 AD. The vulnerability of modern society to such an event has increased exponentially since the 6th century. Take, for instance, the Campi Flegrei caldera near Naples, Italy. Its last major eruption in 1538 killed a mere 3,000 people. Today, however, a staggering 400,000 people live within the active caldera itself. This concentration of population, this exponential increase in density, highlights a terrifying reality. the human cost of a future major eruption would be immeasurably higher, leading to an almost unimaginable scale of displacement and death. We have built our intricate, interconnected societies directly atop geological fault lines, both literal and metaphorical. A major eruption from one of these supervolcanoes would trigger not just a regional disaster, but a cascading series of global crises. It would lead to total disaster for Italy, and Europe swiftly followed by worldwide climatic repercussions. The most immediate and profound impact for people everywhere would be the disruption of food supply. Imagine the sun-dimmed temperatures dropping and agricultural yields plummeting globally for years. Unlike the 6th century, where localized subsistence economies could perhaps fall back on foraging, hunting, or collecting shellfish from local coasts, our modern global population densities make such localized coping impossible. With billions to feed and agricultural systems optimized for stable, predictable climates, a sustained disruption to food production would lead to an unprecedented crisis. There would be no ability to import from other countries, because every nation would be grappling with its own internal food security issues. Beyond food, our highly complex modern infrastructure would face unprecedented challenges. Communication systems, including the satellites that underpin our global connectivity, would be very severely interrupted for long periods by the atmospheric dust and subsequent electromagnetic interference. Air transport, which links our globalized economy, would become virtually impossible, grounding flights and isolating continents. The intricate web of supply chains that delivers everything from medicine to daily necessities would simply unravel. The challenges to modern coping mechanisms are stark. We have moved far beyond subsistence economies, our lives reliant on just-in-time delivery and globalized markets. When these systems break down, the consequences are profound. Ultimately, the lesson from 535 AD for the modern world is grim but vital. A widespread struggle for resources would inevitably lead to warfare in the modern world. When populations are starving, when their children are sick, and when their governments are unable to provide basic necessities, people will be forced to either sit and starve or try and acquire food by any means necessary. The veneer of modern civility would likely crack under such existential pressure. This chilling scenario suggests that historians, economists, and politicians accustomed to focusing on human-driven forces should pay rather more attention to the ability of natural forces to change history. The Earth has a long memory, and it speaks in geological time often with a thunderous voice. The year 535 AD serves as a stark, whispered warning from the past to a future that may be more vulnerable than it imagines. And so our journey through the echoes of 535 AD draws to a gentle close. We've traversed ancient lands, witnessed profound upheavals, and glimpsed the sheer resilience of humanity in the face of truly world-altering events. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? To consider a time when the sun itself seemed to dim, when the very ground beneath your feet felt less stable, and when the certainty of tomorrow vanished with the light. Imagine the quiet desperation, the cold seeping into bone, the hunger a constant companion, the fear of an invisible plague. But now, as the last whispers of this distant past begin to fade, allow yourself to simply be. Feel the soft comfort of your bed, the gentle warmth of your blankets, the stillness of the air around you. Contrast the imagined cold of those ancient nights with the warmth you now feel, the chronic hunger, with the knowledge of food readily available. The terrifying uncertainty with the quiet peace of your own home. The world has changed immensely since those turbulent centuries. The struggles of the 6th century are long behind us, absorbed into the vast tapestry of history. Let the details of distant disasters gently dissolve now like morning mist, leaving only a sense of quiet reflection. Your mind, having journeyed so far, can now drift softly unburdened. Allow the rhythm of your breath to deepen to steady. Feel the relaxation spread through your body from your toes to the crown of your head. The history we explored is fascinating. Yes, but its purpose tonight is fulfilled. It is simply a story told a distant echo, now allowing your thoughts to slow, your worries to recede. There is only peace here.